Welcome everybody. We're going to get started with our We Need to Talk series on starting conversations about race in our school community. My name's Eli Steenledge, and I am a parent at Lowell Elementary School and also the Director of Communications for Justified Anger. So this session is brought to you by the Lowell Community Organization, the parent-teacher group for Lowell, and also Justified Anger is a sponsor as well. I'm really excited about this second session because we have a great guest, Liladagee, and she is going to be talking about defending Black girlhood. So talking about Black girlhood, and she is a prominent speaker, activist, artist, and preacher in Madison. With more than 30 years in the fields of education and social services, she has founded the Black Women Heal, a Madison-based nonprofit organization that inspires Black women to join her in her life's work to defend Black girlhood by creating safe places for Black girls as well as themselves to heal. So I've also been excited to see, and you may have noticed too, Lilada has been doing lots of things this summer, including you may have saw her painting murals on State Street. You may see her yard signs promoting Black culture and Black lives all over town on the yard signs. So her artwork's really getting out there, and she's really been speaking up for Black lives and specifically Black girls. So we thought this was an important topic that doesn't always get the attention that it needs in our community. So we're really glad to have you here to join us, Lilada. How are you doing today?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Good. So we are just going to let you take things away here in just a moment. For those of you watching on Facebook, we want to invite you to really interact with this session. From what I know, Lilada kind of feeds off that interaction. So although she won't be able to directly see your comments, we'd love for you to comment. We'll pass that information along to her. And towards the end of our hour, we're going to ask some questions that do come from the community to Lilada, some things that people in the community are concerned about or have questions about on this topic. And feel free to ask questions or make comments on Facebook. Don't be shy, and make this a good conversation. So Lilada, I'm going to turn things over to you, and we'll be excited to hear what you have to say.
Excellent. Thank you. So just to reiterate, please do ask questions, because questions really become the foundation of how we move from where we are to where we want to be. And sometimes it can be, intimidating to ask the questions, what have you, but it's really important that we hear from you for this to be a really great conversation. And so as we go along, I'm trying to make this as interactive as possible, and so please do respond, and I'll try to get as much information as we go along. So I'll just tell you a little bit about myself, and then I'll talk about my work, and then I'll talk about my experiences working with Black girls and in school settings in particular. So as Eli said, my name is Liladagee. I am a product really of Madison schools. I moved from Chicago when I was 4 years old, upon which time I started kindergarten at Lapham Elementary School. And so that was kind of my first introduction to school. It was my first real deep introduction to being in white culture, because I moved from, the west side of Chicago, where my whole world was Black. And I hadn't started school yet, so I didn't have the socialization of school, and I didn't have the socialization of preschool either, because I grew up in a traditional kind of what Black folks were doing in the 60s and 70s. My mother worked, and my grandmother came in and kept us at home. And so we kind of had that experience where we had that multi-generational type of lifestyle. But I was not in daycare. I was never in like Head Start or anything like that. I went right pretty much from the home into school setting. And probably, that was my experience at Lapham, starting kindergarten there, was my first realization that I was Black. and kind of coming into that situation. We moved from the east side to the south side, and I started attending school at Leopold. And my experience at Leopold, was much the same as Lapham. One of the things that was different was I remember being in third grade in particular, and we were learning about slavery. And this was a topic that was new to me, unbeknownst to most people, Black people don't sit around eating fried chicken and talking about slavery. So it was something that I didn't know anything about until I was learning about it in school. And the way that we learned about it was really about the great white hope of Abraham Lincoln and how this great mighty man freed Black people from slavery, and isn't he wonderful, and all those type of things. We didn't learn about how Black people got in slavery. We didn't learn about how Black people were treated during slavery. We just kind of learned this great white story. And that day at recess, I'm playing with my friends, and one of the white girls from classroom walked up to me and she said, "You should be grateful to us." I'm thinking, what for? She said, "You should be grateful to us because we freed you from slavery." Ta-da! That was the second time that I really understood and realized that I was Black. And even though I didn't fully understand the fullness of the slavery story, I knew how I felt in that moment. That was like the first time that I can really remember feeling somehow less than because I was Black. And it was a combination of the lesson we had just had in class and feeling like all the white people were looking at me as we're learning about slavery. And then it was the white girl coming up to me and making this statement. And I went home, and I don't know why, but I brought it up to my mother. And she let me have it in terms of, wait a minute, let me tell you really what happened. And as much as my third grade mind could comprehend, there was a lifting in this conversation with my mother of the understanding, as much as I could take in, that I didn't need to be grateful to that girl or any other white person about being freed from slavery. But those were like two other times that I feel really just being conscious of Blackness, conscious of there was something different about being Black, conscious of there was something less than being Black, and then a consciousness of white people telling the story about Blackness in a different way. Now, I didn't fully unpack all of that at the time, but those concepts and those feelings and those emotions around race that was kind of some of the places where it was first planted. And Leopold is also the school that I had my first Black teacher, Mrs. Bernard. And I can remember for the first time in school being like, oh, wow, she looks like my grandmother, and having a sense of relax that I hadn't felt before. And again, I would have been able to articulate that at the time, but I knew there was something about it. There was something that was different. There was a different feeling I was having being in class with Mrs. Bernard that I hadn't had in my previous years in school. I went from Leopold on to Lincoln School. And at the time, Lincoln was a middle school. And that's where I had my most of the biggest amount of Black teachers and administrators. So at Leopold, Mrs. Bernard, which she was one of the first Black teachers, I believe she was the first Black female teacher in the Madison School District. And when I was at Lincoln, I had several Black teachers as well as Black administrators at the time. And that was really, really different because now I'm having multiple teachers. Now I'm seeing Black people in a leadership position. The school secretary was Black. I had a Black female principal at a time, had Black women and Black male teachers. And it was just a different experience. Lincoln was a very mixed experience for me. The neighborhoods from the South Side fed in, but also the Monona neighborhood fed into Lincoln. And I went on from Lincoln to West High School. I often think I should have went to La Follette, so I could have all L's, but I didn't, and I'm glad I didn't. I'm a very proud West graduate. But there again, race became really evident to me as I was talking to my school counselor and talking about my aspirations. And she just kind of just said, well, basically, I wanted to go to a 4-year college and had my sights on University of Wisconsin-Madison, because what the counselor didn't realize was the reason we moved to Madison was my mother came here as a non-traditional student in the 70s. That's why we came to Madison. And so the thought idea about college for me, for my brother, wasn't if, it was where you were going to go. So that wasn't even a discussion as to whether or not I felt like I could go to college. But when I talked with my school counselor about it, she really was trying to redirect me to go to MATC to get a trade. And, it was just really interesting, because there was no encouragement. There was no kind of, you can do, they believe in you type of a thing. It was just, Black girl, go get a trade, and that's what you have in life. Now, one wouldn't think this would be the type of conversations we were having in the early 80s. I graduated high school in 83, but these are the conversations we were having at West High School in the 80s. But unfortunately, some 20 some years later, when my own children were going to West and my niece was going to West, these are the same conversations the counselors were having with Black students, irrespective of their GPA. It was still this kind of, let's shrink down who you think you can be. Let's shrink down what you think you can be. And let's feed you into who I think you are and what I think you can do. And so I did go on to the University of Wisconsin at Madison. In my second semester, I made the dean's list and I triple majored. And so would love to see my counselor to tell her that if I only cared about her opinion. So that's just kind of my school experience as a student in Madison School District, but also I had the experience of being a parent in the Madison School District. Now, most of the time, my kids did go to parochial school. I made that decision because I wanted to be in a smaller school setting and I wanted them to have an intentional education. So they did that until second grade. My daughter went to Franklin. It was a horrible experience. And I put her back into parochial school. The best school experience they had was at St. James. It was, believe it or not, very diverse. Some grades were more diverse than others, but overall, there's a lot of diversity in students. And it was a pretty overall great experience for them. My daughter went to Edgewood High School for 2 years. And after 2 years there, she just said, Mom, I can't do it. They want you all to be the same. If you're not just like everybody else, there's just no room for you to express yourself. And so she went to West, and both of my kids ended up graduating from my alma mater. And, I had very discouraging experiences with Franklin School, with West High School, with some of the teachers. And what I would do each year, I would send out an email to all of my kids' teachers. I would introduce myself. I would explain my expectations for my children. I would give them my cell number. I would give them my email number. I would explain my expectations both for grades as well as behavior. And if my kids were outside of that box, contact me. And I really think that one of the worst things that had happened to schools and the relationship between parents and educators has been Power School, or whatever you call it in your district or school, because it has taken away the expectation of teachers to actually reach out. Like when I was in school, if something was going on, the teacher would pick up the phone. We didn't have email. We didn't have fax machines. It wasn't a stone age, but we didn't have all that electronic stuff. So if a teacher wanted to have a conversation with a parent, she had to actually pick up a phone, dial it, and call. And so with this Power School situation, this messages are up, grades are up. whether or not kids are turning homework is up. And what I do know is that most of the time, those things are not up to date. Teachers are really busy. There's many times you'll go to check information and it's not up to date. So it really doesn't tell you what you think it's telling us. And then it really just causes distance. So I had a situation with my son, and I went in for the parent-teacher conference, and the teacher brings up an incident that had happened about 6 weeks previous, where she said, my son called her a B. And I'm thinking, well, when did this happen? And she mentions it was like four or so weeks ago. She mentioned he had been skipping class. I'm thinking, I'm confused at this point, because I've reached out to you and said, if my son does call out to me. And she didn't tell me. And I just thought in that moment, and I really challenged that teacher, but I realized that she thought she knew who I was. And she assumed how I would or would not respond as a Black parent to my Black son's behavior in class. So she didn't even give me the opportunity to respond. She didn't even give me the opportunity, because his Power School wasn't updated that he was missing class, So I'm thinking, you're telling me a whole bunch about what you're expecting of my child. And even though I'm someone who, worked with schools, worked with MMSD, worked with other school districts, and I was engaging as much as I could with teachers, I still was put in a category of Black parents don't care. I've worked in the school setting since sometime in the 80s. When I graduated high school, I started working in schools as an when I was in college, I started working in the schools as a tutor. When I graduated, I started working as an educational assistant. And since that time, I've helped to start Nehemiah. And in that, I developed the youth programs. And through that, created just partnerships with Madison schools and offering groups and programs and educational programs in partnership with a number of schools across the city in the elevation of Black students. And in addition, I do a lot of consulting work. And in that work, I've also done a lot of groups with Black girls. And so I really focus on defending Black girls, because as I'm looking at my work and I'm looking at what's going on with Black girls, I'm thinking there's a lot that is going on with Black girls, but there's not a lot that is responding to what's going on with Black girls. And so I really look at this issue a lot, talking to girls. I've done groups in elementary, middle, and high school. And the one thing that I have found is overwhelmingly the Black girls feel disconnected, disrespected, and they feel dismissed. And I know many of us are probably, aware of the work that's been done and the studies that have been done about Black girls being suspended from school at high numbers, higher than anyone else, and kind of the issues that are going on with them, how those suspensions often lead to police contact, et cetera, and it's leaving Black girls kind of in the lurch right now. So I decided to focus in on this. And in that, I want to share a story with you that I received from a training I was doing. So I was doing a training with a school district with counselors. It was really a mix. It was librarian staff, and then this kind of food service staff. We were having this workshop. And this counselor from one of the middle schools tells the story, and I asked for her permission to be able to share this. She tells a story of how she worked at the middle school, and some years later, she goes into the home where her mother, who has Alzheimer's, is living. And when she goes in one day, she sees a caregiver for her mom. And it was a Black girl that was from her school. She said when she saw this girl, she had to begin to just question herself, because this young lady was a part of a 2 or 3 girl group who just kind of struggled in school. And she began to think, how did I treat this girl? How did I interact with this girl? What kind of impression did I make upon her? Because this girl is now taking care of my mother. And she was afraid that the ways in which she disrespected, disconnected, and dismissed this Black girl was now going to be played out on the care of her mother. I want to give you a juxtaposition of that story. Years later, not at the time, years later now, my mother has Alzheimer's and she's in a home. And one time I go and to visit her and I see a new staff person and I realize this was a girl that I had worked with when I was at one of the middle schools. And immediately I remembered how I engaged with this girl. I remembered that we had a positive relationship. I remember that I had worked to have her be seen. And conversely, I was excited that this girl was working with my mother because I knew how I had treated her. And I had every expectation that the love and the respect that I had engaged with her in middle school, she would in turn transfer to my mother. And she did. We never know where the students will end up in our lives 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. And I guess a blank question I'll just put out to you is, which daughter do you want to be? How we choose to engage with students, and particularly looking at Black girls who in droves are disengaged, how we do that is a personal commitment. Quite often, we have these different trainings that we take. We have these different models that we use for behavior modification. We have all of these intellectual things that we come in, and we have our great mission statements about we're inclusive and we believe in equity and all this kind of stuff. What's the new thing now? Anti-racist schooling. That sounds so good. So we have all this language. White people love language. You love words. You love the intellectualism of the experiences. But what I'm here to tell you today is, if you are not personally committed to live anti-racistly, you will not be able to carry it off in your classrooms. You will not be able to carry it off in your counseling situations with students. You won't be able to carry it off with your interaction with students or with their parents. It's not anything that you can do from 9 to 5 and then you go from there. It's nothing that you can do that you don't have to examine where you've been, what you've learned, what your socialization has been around race. You can't do it without dealing with this here. It can't be done. And if you don't do it here, kids will pick it up. For instance, there's a particular behavioral engagement program where you're supposed to catch kids doing good and say it. Instead of reinforcing the negative behavior, don't do that. When you see them doing something good, oh, that's so great. Okay. I've had elementary school Black girls tell me, I can tell the difference when my teacher is talking to white kids. She'll tell them that they did good on their math test. She'll tell them that they did well on their homework. She'll tell them good things about them, that they're smart. But when she talks to me, she'll say things like, good job on tying your shoes. So even using the same program, when it's run through our implicit biases, kids pick it up. They pick it up. And so even if you're saying, but I'm using the same school of thought with every student, are you using it the same way? So one question that I have is, if we're talking about anti-racist schooling, can I have some comments from you all on what is racist schooling? Because we need to know what it is in order to make it not that. So I'll give you a moment and see if I can get some responses from those who are monitoring the comments on Facebook. What is racist schooling? And how have you seen that? What does it look like? How does it play out? How does it play out in your school? Has it played out in your classroom? What is racist schooling? Are we getting any comments from the Facebook people? Because I think it's important to unpack that as we commit to anti-racist schooling, again, so that it goes beyond just a term. Okay, here we go. Different expectations for students. Yeah. We know many students Black History Month. I'm not sure if I understand what that means in terms of racist schooling. But I think what's important is, when we talk about student expectation, droves of studies have been done about how students respond to the level of expectation that teachers have for them. Only white teachers, yes. Yes. Now, one wouldn't think that that is particularly racist schooling, because HR will have a reason why they're only white teachers. Black teachers don't stay. Black teachers don't like the weather. There's always some reason for it. But what we don't understand sometimes, or we understand it but we don't deal with it, is the fact that just like that time when I was in 4th grade and I had Miss Bernard as my first Black teacher, and I felt this immediate connection. I felt, oh, she reminds me of my grandma. That's what white students get every single day. Every time they walk in a school building and they see the bus driver, and only white people in books, yes, they see the bus drivers, they see the teachers, they see the principals, they see the lunch ladies. They see whiteness affirmed, and they see whiteness in a way that they can connect with. Looks like my mom, my auntie, my father, my uncle. So they feel this level of relax. They feel this level of comfort every time they walk in the school building. Conversely, Black kids feel the difference. They feel the disconnect. And then teachers also have that. When they look at white kids, they see their son, they see their nephew, they see their grandkid, they see their neighbor's son, they see their, you know what I'm saying? They see their niece, and they feel a connection to these white kids. Even if they don't have a relationship with them, they feel they can understand their experience, they feel they can understand where they're coming from, where they're going to, in a way that they can't with Black kids. And so that really leads itself to creating an environment that is more engaging, more comfortable for white students than it is for Black students. So I'm just going to look at some of the responses here. Only white people in books, behavior problems. I'd like to know what that means in terms of what is racist schooling. Do you mean, what does that mean? So if you wrote that, I would like that. White opportunity hoarding. Oh my God. Exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. White cultural norms, privileges white people. So yeah, those are some really key things that end up there. So there's a couple questions I want to respond to. We'd love to hear more about efforts to recruit and retain Black teachers in our schools and how parents can support those efforts. Well, I think this is the thing. And I've worked with a school district, and I was able to increase their retention and their obtainment of Black teachers. And this is the thing, don't hire one Black teacher. Now, as parents, this is how you can support those efforts. Now, this is what I know. When white parents want something at their school, if they want some advantage for their kids, y'all will go to town. When white parents begin to believe that there is an advantage to having a diverse school experience for their white kids, you all will drive it. You will drive it. So that's how white parents can help. because it is essentially up to you when you all want laptops or you want a different kind of science program, when you want AP classes for your kids, whatever it is that you want, when you're hoarding opportunities, creating opportunities for your kids, when white parents decide that a diverse school environment, I had to say it again, is advantageous for their white kids, we will see a change because you will push for the change. And so, yes, for me, absolutely, it was crucial for me to see a Black teacher. It was helpful for me to see a Black teacher. It was comforting for me to see a Black teacher. But what we have to learn is that, you know, one of the biggest questions I have, nobody's racist, right? Nobody is racist. But I keep asking myself, how do these non-racist white people, liberals, particularly in Madison, how is it that nobody's racist, but you keep raising children who keep the status quo of racism? And we know that racism is systematic oppression. But how do the systems stay in place? Because once you retire, then your kids take over. So how does that happen? It happens because there's no intentionality around making sure that your kids aren't racist, that they understand racism, that they understand it's their responsibility to begin to tear these things down. And what helps to feed this? When a white boy and girl go through the entire school system and they never have a Black teacher, they never see a Black administrator, they never see a Black counselor, they never see even a Black librarian, they never see a Black school nurse, they never see even a Black food server. If all they see is a Black janitor, what are they going to think? Do you as a parent have to tell them that Black people do these menial jobs? Do you have to tell them Black people aren't supposed to be teachers? No, they see it. And it's loud and clear. It's exclamation point after exclamation point because they don't see it. So they recognize that the school doesn't value diversity. Their parents don't value diversity. The parents don't challenge it, the lack of it. So then they think this is the way it's supposed to be. So now Johnny grows up, and now Johnny is a principal. Do you think Johnny's going to go out of his way to hire a diverse staff? Why would he? Because he hasn't seen it. He hasn't seen the value of it. So why would he? And so we have these systems that continue because we haven't changed something. And, you know, even as we're looking systematically, and there's so many things that are going on in our country and in our world right now, there's things that we can do. Sometimes the issue seems so big, like how in the hell do you make an anti-racist school? Okay. So part of it is starting with yourself. What do you need to change as a person? What did you hear at the Thanksgiving table when you was growing up? Did you hear the N-word? You know what I'm saying? What do you need to change? And then if you're a parent, you know, what do you need to teach your children? And as a family commit to, as a family do. And then you go out from there. I think so often we start out here with these grandiose ideas that are hard to put in place if the people who are carrying them out haven't had a change of heart, haven't shifted their minds. And so back to the question is we'd love to hear more efforts to recruit and retain Black teachers in our schools and how parents can support those efforts. Parents can support the efforts by demanding it to be so, for one. And then two, you can support the effort by making sure they don't hire one Black teacher. We're tired of being the only Black person. And then everybody wonders why we eat lunch by ourselves. You know what I'm saying? So you have to help to build community around these teachers. Hire a couple of them. See, but that makes white people feel a little uncomfortable. We can deal with one of you, but we don't want to have 3 or 4 of you necessarily teaching up in here. So demand it, support it, making sure you're getting a couple of them, and find ways that you can support Black teachers, engage with Black teachers, befriend Black teachers. When they are at your school, go out of your way to speak to them, to build a relationship, to build a rapport with them. There's another question that says, I also went to Lapham and grew up in Madison schools, and I had more Black teachers leadership than I see my son having now many years later. Very interesting. I wonder if you were there when Miss Thomas was the principal in kind of the seconds. I think Lapham closed for a little bit and then reopened, and I'm sure maybe that was your time. When I was there, it was all white. So yeah, it's really about making sure that our schools are diverse as possible as parents. Again, when you value that, you'll demand it like you demand everything else, and then we'll see a change. But relationship has to come into place in order to be able to maintain it. Nobody wants to be any place they don't feel comfortable. Nobody wants to be in a place where they don't feel valued. No one wants to be in a place where they feel ostracized, whether they are a child or they are a teacher. And so looking at the environments, both from the child perspective of your schools, but you also have to look at the environment from the workforce perspective of your schools as well. Would your school be a school that a Black person would feel comfortable in? Is your school a place where a Black child feels comfortable? Is your classroom a classroom where a Black girl will feel affirmed? A Black first grader being picked on by her classmates, and when I brought it to her teacher's attention, which I should not have had to do, her teacher said, well, she is super annoying and hard to deal with. Oh my God. And do you think that girl didn't feel like her teacher felt that she was super annoying and was hard to deal with? Now, this teacher never would have said that to her. And she probably never would have said this to a Black person, but she felt she could say it to you. What did you say back? That's the question. What did you say back? What did you do when she said that? How far did you take it from there? Did you reach out to the girl? Because when you want to know if one of your kids' teachers felt like your child was super annoying and hard to deal with. So I was a part of one of these groups on Facebook. I don't even know how I got a part of that group, okay? I'm tired of people adding me to Facebook groups. But this one group, it was part of one of these behavioral modification programs. And this teacher comes on and she says how, she was dealing with this student who was really annoying and, was really hard to deal with and blah, 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 blah. Now, all the other white people in that group was applauding her for being honest, applauding her for bringing this here. I'm the only person, and I don't know if the kid was Black, white, or otherwise. I just knew that was just some BS that teacher was talking about a kid. And she didn't need to be congratulated about it because she kept that language she never said anything about what she needed to do to better engage with that student. It was all about this student being annoying and difficult to work with. Now, I know students can be annoying and difficult to work with, but as adults, we have to figure out what buttons are they pushing in us, okay? Because we can be annoying and difficult to work with too for kids. So I just basically said, all you're saying is stuff about the kid. You're not saying anything that you're working on. So, when we catch teachers doing stuff like this, we need to have a conversation with the principal because you're not her boss. The principal need to be brought in. I would have told the parent. What can a white teacher do to create that comfortable and welcoming environment for Black kids and girls? White teachers, ask yourself what makes you feel comfortable. What makes you feel invited when you go to a space? What makes you feel uncomfortable? What makes you feel uninvited when you're in a space? You know what I'm saying? It's not a Black way necessarily per se. It's a discomfort. What makes you feel comfortable when you go to somebody's house for, say, Thanksgiving dinner? What makes you feel comfortable? When you're in a work environment, what makes you feel comfortable? When you go to a conference, what makes you feel comfortable? What makes you feel uncomfortable? Feeling like you're wanted to be there is one of the greatest ways to make a Black kid feel comfortable. So let me ask ask that question back to you all. What can a white teacher do to create the comfortable and welcoming environment for Black kids and girls? I'm asking y'all that. You tell me. I'm gonna take a sip of my water right quick, but y'all come up with some answers. Because one of the things really is, the question is, what can I do? What can I do to make my environment comfortable and welcoming to Black kids and Black girls? Okay, I'm just gonna read this reply. She said she told about the child being annoying and hard to deal with. I told her that wasn't okay. And she also caught herself and tried to backtrack as soon as it was out of her mouth. I told the principal and also our new principal, what else could I have done? That is good, okay? That's good. You know, I would have pushed the principal to, what was he gonna do? What was gonna be their response to this? And I probably would have made sure I had a relationship with that child's mother, built a relationship with that child's mother, you know, because many educators, not all, but many of you have children yourself. Sometimes your children go to the same school that you work at, you know, and so even as parents yourself of children who are in school, like, how are you reaching out to Black parents? How are you reaching out to parents of Black girls and developing some rapport with them, developing some continuity of relationship with them? I had another comment here: a racist education, when teacher thinks they know a Black student's story and family when they haven't gotten to know them as individuals. Oh, yes. Oh, yes, indeed. And where's that information based upon? It's based upon, just like the history story was based upon whiteness and white supremacy. The story about slavery was told in a way to make white people feel really, really, really good about themselves, to retelling the story of history. So, you know, when we have education that dismisses the experience that Black people have had in this country and elevates the white saviorism, that is a racist education. It really, really is. I see we have about 15 minutes left, and I know Eli had some questions for me from you all, and please think of some other questions that you would like to ask. But I'm also going to ask a question as Eli comes on. I want to ask you, what should white teachers or educators be asking themselves about working with Black girls? And I would love to hear some responses from you all about that, as well as I'll be able to reply to some of the questions that Eli has for me. Again, the question was, what should white teachers be asking themselves about working with Black girls? Hey, Eli.
Hey, this is great. Thanks for doing this. I think one of the questions we had from the community is, and I think this would relate to a good time to mention your podcast as well. Defending Black Girlhood has that same title, and it's excellent, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah. What is the reality of Black girls in schools? Can you give us an idea of what it's like to walk in the shoes of a Black girl for a day? What do you think Black girls would like their white classmates and families to know that they don't know? So can you kind of take us into a perspective of, you know, maybe thinking about yourself or your daughter, even, you know, what their school experience was like?
Absolutely. And so Black girls from elementary school through high school feel disrespected. They really do. They feel like this is a place that is not for them. They don't feel reflected in the curriculum. They're not reflected in who works at the school. They're not reflected in any kind of experience that they're having. And so they feel like they're in a foreign land, and they feel like they're in a place where they're not wanted. They feel like they're in a place where they're not valued. They feel like they're in a place where they're not worthy. You know, I was doing a group with a bunch of fourth grade Black girls, and we were coming to the close of group, and one of the girls says, okay, I have to change how I act when I walk through that door. I have to act like they want me to act. I have to act white. I have to act differently. And I would see, and I've done groups in schools for 30 years. And the responses with Black girls in particular is this feeling of not belonging. Now, when you think about how much time Black girls spend in school, can you imagine what it feels like every day to go to a place where you don't feel valued, you don't feel heard, you don't feel seen, you don't feel important, you're not reflected, you're not encouraged? Can you imagine what that does to your psyche to have that experience day in and day out, day in and day out? They feel like that place is not for them. And so it's a very encouraging space. It's a hard space to excel in. So you have kids who just feel so disconnected, they don't try anymore. And then you have students who feel like they have to excel to prove that they're not who you believe that they are. That's a lot of pressure too.
That's good. And I have another question for you too on a slightly different topic, but could you tell us a little bit about, from the perspective of your podcast and that story, what have you sort of learned, or what was kind of confirmed for you about the experience of Black girls? Because I know that was kind of a specific situation, but I think a lot of Black girls carry trauma, from what I've learned from you. And specifically, like, it seems like the schools failed that young lady in a lot of ways, who's featured in your podcast that you're exploring. And so can you tell us a little bit what you learned specifically? Because I know you talked to teachers and social workers, parents, friends, just like what that environment was like, and maybe how it, if she saw more representation, would have been a different experience. Would she felt like she could have reached out and had more support, and sooner, right?
Right.
So that's kind of a big question. But in general, like, what did you kind of see from the school system that failed her, I guess?
So I'm telling, in the first season of the Defending Black Girlhood podcast, I'm telling the story of Erica Hill, who, by my estimation, is one of the most tragic stories of a Black girl in our Madison area. And she's a girl who had experienced years and years and years of physical abuse. When she reported, the very next day, she never stepped inside a school again. She was missing for 12 years. The police was never called. And years later, they found that she had been murdered, allegedly, by her mother. And the thing that's so difficult about Erica's story is that it was so obvious. And for many years, they felt that she was being abused in just very obvious ways, in that, her hair was always horrible, braids falling out. She always wore long sleeves, turtlenecks, and long pants, no matter the weather, hot, cold. She was always up to her neck, down to her wrist, down to her ankles. Just being really mousy and quiet, her personality really changed. And so there were many, many opportunities to engage, to interact, and to intervene. And even when, after years of trying to get her to talk, she finally tells, the next day she's pulled from school. And that was pretty much it. They thought about it some, but there was no alert. There was no ringing of the bell. She's been looking abused, thinking she was abused for years, for 6th grade, for 7th grade, for 8th grade. She finally confirms it. She shows some scars. We call social services. And then the next day, she's pulled from school. Yet the police weren't called. Yet the Amber Alert was not put in place. It was just left. And it just, I think for me, it really just underscored how a Black girl can be living out loud her experience of trauma, of abuse, and still be invisible. Like, it could be so loud, it could be so evident, and still not missed, still not addressed, still not dealt with in a way that protects her, that defends her Black girlhood. And, when we're looking at the epidemic of missing Black girls and women throughout the United States, it's estimated 65,000 and are reported missing. So Erica Hill doesn't even fall within that reported number because she wasn't reported missing. And I think how vulnerable our girls are. And then I think even in this season that we're in with this pandemic, the deeper level of vulnerability, because now girls like Erica aren't even being seen by teachers, by counselors, by social workers, even to make any type of an inference. And so we know in this season that the numbers of calls to human services have gone down. And it's not because abuse has stopped. It's because those who are mandated to report the abuse haven't seen the kids to even report it. And so it's a very tragic story, and we're deep into it. And so I invite actually every educator to listen to this, because my hope is that in listening to Erica Hill's story, we find ways how to see Erica Hills that are in our classrooms, that are in our school buildings right now.
I just have two more questions, I think, with our time. One thing personally that I have heard quite a bit from mainly white educators is, they're often struggling between these two different things that they've heard, like sort of mixed messages, right? And I do want to be clear when I ask this question that I'm not trying to group all, African Americans and Black kids together in one homogenous group.
So this question about to make me mad, Eli?
No, yeah. But because I think, there's Black kids from all different economic levels and different home experiences and things. But in general, there's kind of this concept of like, we have to understand, like you're talking about, the trauma, the history that kids might bring with them, the family life, and we have to understand that and get to know them. So we know, say if they're acting up or loud or whatever it might be, there's all different personalities, but like we can maybe understand where that's coming from a little bit more. And I know that's just true of like my kids too. So I'm just talking about whatever.
Sure.
But so there's kind of that message, I think, being sent to educators, but then there's also
can we pause there?
Yeah, sure.
So this is what I really need white people to do. I need you to understand your history of trauma, because you can't understand my history of trauma without understanding your own history of trauma. And you can't understand my history of trauma without understanding the history of trauma that your ancestors created for mine. And so when we're looking at trauma for Black girls, we can't just look at what went on today, yesterday, last year. We have to understand historical trauma, particularly in the Americas, that have been done to Black women and Black girls. So that, whether that Black girl in your classroom has experienced direct trauma herself, she carries trauma in her body. And it's important for white people to understand the history of that and how that trauma got there. And so, when I took my DNA, I was told that the DNA that I carry in my body physically was in my mother's body physically, in my grandmother's body, etc. And that's how that historical trauma comes out. The more we're learning about trauma, the more we understand that. What we don't often do is conversely understand that there's a certain level of trauma that white people carry from having, how shall I say this in a nice way? I don't know a nice way to say it. From all the shit that was done to Black people. There is a trauma that white people carry from that too, because you have to be in a certain mindset of behavior to treat human beings like animals. You have to be in a certain mindset and behavior to enslave people. You have to be in a certain mindset and behavior to carry forth Jim Crow laws and racism. And I don't want those Black kids going to school with my white daughter. You have to have a certain mindset that's also carried down. So when we're talking about implicit bias that none of us want to believe that is in us, you have to understand, just like I carry my DNA, you carry yours. And so the more you understand about the experience of Black people through Americas, the better you will understand that Black girl that's in your classroom today.
Yeah. Thanks for saying that. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Pointing that out. We need to hear it. Yeah. So the second part of that is, how do you balance that with this other idea being heard of, like, which I think is good, that we need to not treat Black kids as if, they can't achieve as much, or, because they're dealing with so much maybe at home or in the past, that we can't expect as much. So we should, just kind of meet them at whatever level. Um, because I've heard from you and your brother, Alex, that, you had certain experiences where teachers expected a lot of you,
Mm-hmm.
and that inspired you and helped you to the
Absolutely.
same standard. And so how do you what would you maybe tell educators and parents too, but to kind of keep both of those things in mind? How do you kind of navigate that balance, I guess?
Well, there's a lot of studies that have shown that before Black children actually begin school, they are more advanced than white students. So let that sink in. So then when does that change? Black babies tend to walk sooner. Black babies tend to be potty sooner. Black babies tend to talk sooner. So, like, what happens when those Black kids get to white schools that makes them fall behind when they were above developmentally? So that's my response to that, is that we don't start seeing Black kids falling behind until they're sitting in white classrooms.
Yeah, that's good.
Exclamation point on that.
Yeah, yeah. I think the last question before we wrap up here is from a very honest question from a parent in our community, is that she says, my white daughter has no close Black friends. I take responsibility for allowing her to connect with girls that are just like her and want to do better at this. I've wondered about intentionally setting up play dates with her Black classmates, but worry that that might seem tokenizing. Or does this need to start with authentic friendship between parents?
So that would be my question to that parent. Do you have any Black friends? Has your daughter ever seen a Black person in your home? Has she ever heard you talk about somebody Black in a positive way? So, our kids are going to repeat what we do for the most part. They're going to value who we value. They're going to value who they see us with. They're going to respect who they see us respect. And so it starts there. But there has to be an intentionality around, engaging and making sure that your own child has a very integrated experience. And part of that is going to, Black events in the community with your white daughter, showing that you value Black culture and Black experience. But if she doesn't see you with any Black friends, why should she?
I'm just pulling up your slide here, so I want to make sure that we saw that as well. So we're going to wrap up here. I want to leave you a chance, Lilada, to say anything that you want to say before we sort of wrap up here, but I wanted to take a moment to make sure that people knew where to find your podcast and to be able to listen to that. I think they can find it in most places that you find podcasts. Your website is liladagee.org, and you can get connected to all the sort of different things that you're doing, whether it's speaking or doing contract work, your podcast, or your artwork. I want to point out again as well that you're still selling your yard signs. You can get Black Lives Matter ones, Little Lives Matter, Little Black Lives Matter. So all those different ways to get your artwork, and we'll be sharing this as well with the community list after this, so they can just click on those links to let you know. So feel free to tell us any more about your work or any last thoughts that you had as well, but we appreciate you being with us.
Absolutely, and so glad to be here. And so the best way to get any of this information really is to visit my website at liladagee.org. And I really encourage you to subscribe to my podcast, because Erica's story is very compelling, and I think it would be helpful to educators to listen to it and find the holes and places of where things could have been done differently for Erica, but where they can be done differently now for the Ericas in your classroom and your schools. Definitely subscribe to my newsletter. I'm going to be sharing articles about defending Black girlhood and information in times when they weren't, in ways we can get into that, and to just really reach out to educate yourself. And any question that you have, direct it at yourself first and see, what can I do better? How can I be different? And leave you with that question: what should white educators be asking themselves about working with Black girls? And be intentional about working with Black girls in a positive way in your classroom and in your school building. Shout out to Tinny at LAPA Association for their support with the yard signs. It's just like seeing the Black art on State Street, being able to see that around it. Again, that's one way you help your kids to see Black is valued, by showing it to them. And so people can also reach out to me if you have any questions to follow up, if you'd like to share the questions that you came up with for what white educators should ask themselves. If you go to my website, you can use the contact link. It comes directly to me, so you can feel free to ask and share in a very private way with me. Again, liladagee.org.
Great. Yeah, this was wonderful to be able to hear you talk about this topic, and I think it is something that we really do need to hear, and I appreciate that. So thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, and to the community, follow up with Lilada's work and keep pursuing these topics that we're talking about. Keep the conversation going, because we can only make our community better. And I always want to say too, though we're calling this series We Need to Talk, it takes more than talk. This is just the starting point. We really want to emphasize that people need to take action. Like you said, I think an easy one is like, for us parents too, how many other Black parents or friends do we have? And I think that's a really strong thing we need to talk about, honestly. So and think about. So I appreciate even that small action step that we need. So we're going to end our time, and thanks again for being here.